Greetings, I'm your host, Dr. Wolfula, and when I'm not surviving execution, making me completely invulnerable to further prosecution, I'm here at Castle Wolfula reviewing movies. June-Iversal Horror Month continues with my review of Son of Frankenstein, released in 1939 and starring Boris Karloff in his final film appearance as the Frankenstein monster.
Your father made him live for always.
I'll also be reviewing Ghost of Frankenstein later in this video, so stick around.
Father was Frankenstein, and your mother was the lightning.
The mid-1930s were a rough time for Universal Studios. The company was in massive debt over a series of expensive flops, forcing Universal's founder, Carl Laemmle, out of the company he built in 1936. Laemmle died just 3 years after Universal was taken from him, and his son Carl Jr., who pushed for the studio to make horror films to begin with, died 40 years to the day of his father's death. That's the kind of thing that only happens in a horror movie. Universal was no longer family-owned and operated, taken over by the sinister-sounding Standard Capital Corporation, which installed a new president in the form of J. Cheever Cowden, who supposedly held a great disdain for horror films. After the release of Dracula's Daughter in 1936, one of the Laemmle's final productions, Cowden removed horror movies from Universal's schedule. For nearly 3 years, the studio wouldn't make another horror film.
The woman is beautiful.
She was beautiful when she died, 100 years ago.
The thing is, though, horror movies make a lot of money. It's quite possibly the film genre with the most releases because horror is a safe bet. Reissues of Dracula and Frankenstein played to a sold-out theater for several weeks straight at the Regina on Wilshire back in 1938, and those two films were nearly a decade old at that point. Demand for Universal's monster movies was clearly there. Imagine the kind of business they could do with new films. So Universal announced that their first horror movie after a long hiatus would be a third Frankenstein film, initially titled After Frankenstein, which sounds like a Lifetime movie, before eventually being dubbed Son of Frankenstein. And not only did Karloff return to the role of the monster, but he'd also be joined by fellow monster icon and frequent collaborator Bela Lugosi. James Whale, the director of the original Frankenstein and Bride of Frankenstein, wouldn't return for Son, though. Whale's relationship with the studio had soured following Laemmle's departure.
The picture was called The Road Back. It was an indictment of the Great War and what it did to Germany. It was going to be my masterpiece.
The new Universal executives recut Whale's expensive anti-Nazi film, The Road Back, to try to avoid it being boycotted in Nazi Germany, which of course backfired anyway, and Whale was put into director jail making B-movies until his retirement in 1941.
The fucking studio butchered it. They took the guts out of my picture. They brought in another director to add some slapstick.
Son of Frankenstein, ultimately directed by Roland V. Lee, had a difficult production with a very tight schedule. There were issues with writer Willis Cooper's script that delayed the shoot. Consequently, production didn't begin until November 1938, but the film had to be released in January of '39.
And no one will know that he's here until your creation, Father, walks again.
The script still wasn't finished amidst shooting, forcing the film's director, Roland V. Lee, to perform rewrites himself at the last minute on the film's set. Initially, Son of Frankenstein was intended to be shot in color, but a test shoot involving Karloff horsing around with makeup effects legend Jack Pierce determined that the monster's green makeup looked too garish in color.
He asked you to rob any graves? To get him a body?
There were other issues involving weather that further slowed production down. The cast and crew had to even work on Christmas Eve that year. The film didn't finish shooting until January 5th of 1939, just a couple days before the film's release, down to the wire. The heavy amounts of crunch led to Karloff officially retiring from the role of the monster. He was in his 50s by then. The time it took to apply the makeup was punishing. The costume brought physical anguish, and ultimately Karloff felt that the monster as a character had run its course. Karloff would make rare appearances in the monster's makeup on television in the intervening years, and even appeared in the role of a mad scientist in a later Frankenstein film, but Karloff's full-time monstering days were finished with Son of Frankenstein.
We belong dead.
Despite the extreme production issues surrounding the film, its expense at nearly $500,000, the most costly monster film to date, and its blatant nature as a cash grab by Universal's new corporate overlords, Son of Frankenstein somehow managed to avoid disaster and become a classic, and I'll explain why in my review of Son of Frankenstein. But first I have a message from my sponsor. Me. Pledge to my Patreon today to support the channel, help it continue to grow, and you'll also get access to weekly movie nights every Sunday and archive commentaries if you miss the movie nights live. Just $5 a month to get a movie night every week. Here's the movie I'll be streaming next Sunday. Pledge to patreon.com/Dr. Wolfula if you're interested in my bonus streams, and I thank you in advance. Son of Frankenstein tells the story of, and this might shock you, the son of Frankenstein. In this case, Dr. Wolf von Frankenstein. I'm gonna assume Wolf is short for Wolfula.
Out there in the darkness, a new life lies before us.
The previous Dr. Frankenstein, Heinrich, aka Henry, has passed away.
Oh, milady, he'll never speak again.
Colin Clive, the actor who played Henry Frankenstein in the original and Bride, died at a young age in 1937, 2 years before Son of Frankenstein released, so they had to move forward with a different Dr. Frankenstein.
I deliver you these on the instructions of your late father.
But Colin Clive still appears in the third film in the form of a portrait hung in the Frankenstein study.
I think you rather like your father, sir.
If only I could have some small portion of his genius.
Basil Rathbone, best known for playing Sherlock Holmes and for having a perfect name for horror acting, plays Henry Frankenstein's son, Wolf. Wolf is a family man, a proud father, and is just overall a much more warm and amiable figure compared to the steely, cold Henry.
You never can tell what you'll see, can you, Peter?
Because of Henry Frankenstein's passing, Wolf has been charged with moving his wife and son from England and taking over the Frankenstein estate as the new baron of the Swiss village Frankenstein?
Frankenstein.
Wait, the actual village was also named Frankenstein the whole time? A little on the nose, don't you think? The villagers of Frankenstein, Frankensteinians, I guess, aren't proud of their village's namesake, though.
There was a time when our village was prosperous and happy. Look at it now, because of these Frankensteins.
They've grown to resent its association with a man who brought the dead to life and created a monster that terrorized the countryside. But come on, that happened for like 1 week. I'm sure Dr. Frankenstein did a lot of shit to make up for it.
Now I know what it feels like to be gone.
The Frankenstein name's association with death has reached the point where, like in the real world, most people call the monster himself Frankenstein.
9 out of 10 people call that misshapen creature of my father's experiments
Frankenstein.
And I know a lot of nerds insist on only calling him Frankenstein's monster, but I think it's a cool idea that the Frankenstein families and village's legacy is so tied up with the monster to the point where the monster itself is also called Frankenstein.
Your father made him.
You mean to imply, then, that that is my brother?
Son of Frankenstein is a film about legacy. Repairing the Frankenstein reputation rests on Wolf von Frankenstein's shoulders, but he has a tough crowd to work with. The villagers aren't welcoming to Wolf's family, only greeting them out of some sense of ceremony.
We come to meet you, not to greet you.
Village natives refuse to work for the Frankensteins,
None of the people of this province will serve here, no matter what I offer to pay them.
and the village's council members themselves are convinced that Wolf will carry on his father's dark work. And, you know, they're probably right, but they shouldn't judge Wolf before he shows up.
This one is probably just as bad as his father.
It's in the blood, I tell you.
Little trivia, 2 members of the village council were actually in the original Frankenstein as completely different characters. Emil Lang played the burgomaster,
Good day, Herr Baron.
There was a time when our village was prosperous and happy.
and Michael Mark played Maria's father, who was killed in Bride of Frankenstein, but played by a totally different actor in that movie for some reason.
Why'd you bring her here to me?
She has been murdered.
We go to the railway station to welcome another Frankenstein.
Anyway, despite the chilly reception, Wolf's wife, Elsa, adjusts to their new spooky home reasonably well.
It all seems so unreal. Oh, but I'm excited, too.
Wolf's son, Peter, who looks like Thurman Merman with an inexplicable southern dandy accent, also is enjoying his new life.
I hope I don't have teeth like that. It'd be too hard to clean.
Peter Frankenstein was played by Donnie Dunnigan, who also was the voice of Bambi and went on to become a drill sergeant in the Marines. Could you imagine being called a maggot in that little Bambi voice of his?
Well, hello.
Good morning, son.
In contrast to the James Whale films' more gothic art design, Son of Frankenstein has more of a German expressionistic approach to its set design that's really striking. The Frankenstein manor is very abstract and strange. Walls, doorways, archways, they're all tilted at weird angles. It's a cold, empty place that seems like it would be impossible to feel comfortable in.
Why do you suppose they ever built in these beds in this strange position?
If the house was filled with dread,
Place the bedstead head to head.
Every room is massive. The characters seem insignificant in this place, trying to fill the void left by past Frankenstein generations. The film's production was rushed, but you wouldn't know it from how incredible the set design managed to be.
You're living in the black shadow of that cursed place up on the hill.
Things become a little more chilly at the Frankenstein household when they're visited by Inspector Krogh, played by Lionel Atwill, who's one of the best parts of the movie, but is unfortunately also really hard to take seriously due to what is also an admittedly tragic disfigurement.
I've come here, Herr Baron, to assure you of protection.
The Frankenstein monster went full Chewbacca on Krogg's ass when the inspector was a boy, pulling off Krogg's right arm, leaving the inspector with a prosthetic arm in its place, which prevented Krogh from following his military ambitions.
Grab me by the arm.
Very sad backstory, but Krogh constantly using his real arm to move his prosthetic arm suddenly and swiftly with the sound it makes?
Inspector Krogh, District Police.
It's fucking funny. He keeps finding excuses to call attention to his prosthetic arm. When Wolf and Krogh play darts, Krogh even sticks the darts in his fake arm. It's like they were trying to make a joke out of this guy's disability, which they probably were. It also doesn't help that Inspector Kemp, Kenneth Mars's parody of Krogh in Young Frankenstein, is virtually a carbon copy of his Son of Frankenstein counterpart down to a recreation of the darts scene. Kemp is just a slightly exaggerated and goofier version of Krogh. It's impossible to separate the parody at this point, much like it's impossible to separate the Frankenstein name from the monster.
You're poisoned already by your name.
It's not superstition that worries me, Herr Doctor, but...
Chromosomes!
That's a bit of a shame, because goofy arm aside, Inspector Krogh is a very interesting, nuanced character. Krogh is the only one keeping order in the village, the only thing preventing the villagers from running Wolf and his family out of town.
And the villagers have seen the many strange instruments that preceded you here. That's why I've come to warn you.
Part of Krogh wants to find any reason he can to see Wolf pay for his father Henry's crimes, and for ruining Krogh's life. For Wolf Frankenstein to validate the village's prejudice against all members of the Frankenstein family.
I'll feed you to the villagers, like the Romans fed Christians to the lions.
But another more reasonable part of Krogh sympathizes with Wolf and understands that just because Wolf bears the Frankenstein name, it shouldn't mean Wolf has to be responsible for what his father did. Krogh recognizes himself in Wolf's son, and Krogh just wants the best for everyone, trying to guide Wolf away from his father Henry's path.
I'm merely here to guarantee you protection against any unprovoked assault. Unprovoked assault!
This doesn't work out, though, when the scruffy, literally crooked, snaggle-toothed Ygor, spelled with a Y, enters the picture, played by Bela Lugosi.
Nobody can mend Ygor's neck. It's all right.
In the years since Dracula, Bela Lugosi's career was in a downturn. Son of Frankenstein was his opportunity to make a comeback. And while that didn't quite work out in the long run, Lugosi as Ygor is one of his greatest performances.
He was hunting.
Now, in more recent times, and thanks in no small part to Young Frankenstein, Ygor has been confused and conflated with the hunchbacked assistant Fritz, played by Dwight Frye in the original Frankenstein.
Is it all right? The neck's broken.
Ygor and Fritz perform similar roles assisting a Frankenstein in their work, and they're both sadistic, but Ygor is on a whole other level of sadistic, and unlike Fritz, Ygor is the one friend the monster has in this world.
My friend does things for me.
Ygor and the monster are two sides of the same coin. Igor's also undead, sort of.
This is place of the dead. You're all dead here.
Ygor was hung for allegedly digging up corpses for ambiguous reasons.
Why did they hang you?
Oh, they stole bodies. They said.
Yes.
But Igor's execution didn't take. Ygor survived and was left with a broken neck. But the weird thing is, because Ygor was officially declared dead, he for some reason is considered, for all intents and purposes, dead.
No, you no can hang me again. No, that's been settled. You were hanged and pronounced dead. No.
So he can't be sentenced to execution ever again, and seemingly can't be prosecuted for any future crimes.
You mean to say that if he commits another crime that he can't be hanged again?
Well, yes, but I do nothing.
Very strange legal loophole in the village of Frankenstein. But Ygor takes delight in his untouchable status, boldly giving this guy whatever the 1930s equivalent to COVID was.
You spit on me!
Bone gets stuck in my throat.
The village council does take advantage of Ygor themselves by making him do their dirty work, like spying on Wolf von Frankenstein, making sure the doc doesn't continue his father's work.
Has he asked you to rob any graves? To get him a body?
But unbeknownst to the council, that's exactly what Ygor wants Wolf to do. To Wolf's surprise, his father's creation had survived its self-induced lab explosion in Bride of Frankenstein. Only the bride's implants survived the explosion. Ygor has since befriended the monster and has been commanding it to murder the jurors that sentenced Ygor to death. But before the 2 remaining jurors could be killed, the monster fell into a comatose state, and only a Frankenstein can figure out how to revive it.
He was standing under a tree when lightning struck.
So Wolf decides to take on the challenge for the sake of science, planning to fix the monster's violent mind in the process and prove his father's work wasn't evil.
That would vindicate my father, and his name would be enshrined among the immortals.
And, you know, Wolf maybe would have succeeded in his goals if Ygor didn't have his own plans for the monster.
Igor, I made him walk, but I haven't made him well. He isn't well here. You understand?
He is well enough for me.
Who can blame Wolf for trusting Ygor? Dude has a trustworthy face.
You must keep him here always.
I keep him here.
Boris Karloff as the monster in Son of Frankenstein is a bit of a weakness of the film, at least compared to previous Frankenstein movies. The monster's characterization is limited mostly to being a mindless killer.
No!
There's very little pathos compared to the previous 2 Frankenstein films, and the monster inexplicably lost the ability to speak that he gained in Bride of Frankenstein.
I love dead, hate living.
Which was Karloff's preference, but it just feels like a de-evolution of the character, with the creature just confirming the village's impression of him, when in the previous films, the villagers perceiving the creature as a monster tragically pushes him to do monstrous things. It also doesn't help that Karloff spends a lot of his screen time just lying on a table being examined, and I'm not a big fan of that sheepskin vest he wears. It kinda just looks like Karloff's wearing part of a Wookiee costume. Jack Pierce's makeup for the monster this time around is solid, but weaker, more simplistic compared to the previous entries too, which can probably be blamed on the rushed production. Still looks good considering. The overall portrayal of the monster in Son of Frankenstein really ends up feeling like a gift from Karloff to Lugosi, allowing Lugosi a chance to finally shine brighter than Karloff, with the juicier role of Ygor, the total opposite of Lugosi's suave portrayal of Dracula, and who's such an asshole to everybody, but they all take it for some reason because they pity him, I guess. They let this guy walk all over them because he's disabled, even though the only reason he is disabled is because he was probably fucking corpses.
Blacksmith.
Body snatcher.
You mean?
Ygor's such a fun, maniacal character, the only true monster in the film, sort of a dark reflection of the 3 other male leads of the movie. Like Wolf, Ygor is an unwanted outcast in the village, but unlike Wolf, Ygor doesn't care about his reputation, least of all improving it.
They die dead. I die live.
Like Inspector Krogh, Ygor was disfigured, but Krogh didn't let his disfigurement stop him from being the best he could be and serving his community.
They stole bodies. They said.
And Ygor and the creature are both monsters, of course, but the difference is that Ygor chooses to be a monster. The creature kills for a friend. Ygor kills for petty revenge. The Frankenstein monster is a bit of a weak link in Son of Frankenstein, and I can see why Karloff decided to bid farewell to the character after this entry, but the human narrative of Son of Frankenstein is arguably a lot stronger and more compelling than in the previous films, thanks in no small part to its stellar cast.
I can't undo the wrongs that you've suffered, but I beg of you, let the dead past remain buried.
Basil Rathbone as Wolf von Frankenstein is a good and honorable man that doesn't let the curse of his namesake stop him from living his best life. He just lets his Frankenstein scientific curiosity get the better of him, reviving the monster, but he had pure intentions. He just let hubris get in the way, and was admittedly a little too trusting of Ygor. But when Wolf realizes he's responsible for the crimes of Ygor and the monster, Wolf tries to undo all of it and desperately get his distressed family to safety.
I'm going to send you and Peter away in the morning.
I've tried so desperately to match your bravery, but...
Oh, my dear.
Even though Wolf made the same mistakes as Henry, Wolf still has the chance to make a brighter future for himself and his family.
Is it the old legendary monster of my father's time? Or am I supposed to have whipped one up as a housewife whips up an omelet?
Despite how last-minute the film's script was, Son of Frankenstein has a solid plot. What lets it down a bit, though, is the pacing. They only had a couple days to finish editing this movie, so they probably didn't have much time to fine-tune it. So Son of Frankenstein ends up much like the monster himself, plodding around for a bit. It's a lot slower than James Whales's Frankenstein movies. Besides the Spanish version of Dracula, Son of Frankenstein is also the longest classic Universal monster movie, at about 100 minutes. These monster movies tended to be closer to an hour long, so Son of Frankenstein does feel a bit padded out in comparison, at nearly 2 hours.
One of the first health resorts, perhaps. Health resort.
Though it's definitely for the best that it is the length that it is, because anything that would have been cut out of the film would have been destroyed. There are alternate cuts of Son of Frankenstein in existence. Supposedly, Universal discovered a longer version of the film, but decided not to release it on home video for some reason, even as a bonus feature. There's also a slightly longer British cut of the film, only 2 minutes longer, which is interesting because usually the British, especially around this time, censored these movies significantly.
I'm gonna find him and kick him off the estate, with your permission.
No matter the cut, the ending of Son of Frankenstein does end up feeling really rushed. The only aspect of the film that does feel rushed given the circumstances. In the last 10 minutes, Wolf just decides to put a cap in Igor's ass. This pisses the monster off, so in retaliation, the monster takes Wolf's son Peter, so Wolf does his best Errol Flynn impression and swings in on a rope, kicking the monster into a convenient sulfur pit. Sulfur pits, always there when you need 'em most. Despite destroying his father's creation, Wolf decides to leave his family's village anyway, and the villagers all celebrate their brief Baron's departure. It's a bit of a hollow ending. You really get the sense that they just ran out of time and were way over budget. Just have them leave instead of building a better life in their new village outside the shadow of the monster.
Goodbye, gentlemen. Goodbye, Baron. Goodbye, Peter.
Son of Frankenstein, despite the flaws that come with its uninspired take on the monster and its pacing issues, is ultimately a classic for its performances, especially Lugosi's Ygor, the characterization of its human stars, and its impressive set design. Son of Frankenstein is not as great to me as Bride of Frankenstein or even the original film, but it's a good epilogue to those movies, exploring the aftermath of Henry Frankenstein's actions, giving us one last glimpse at Karloff as the character that made him a star. I give Son of Frankenstein a prosthetic arm out of broken neck.
Will you have a drink? Or would you like to play darts?
But wait! There's more! I have a bonus review of Ghost of Frankenstein, released in 1942.
He will give you strength of 100 men!
Son of Frankenstein saw the biggest earnings of any of Universal's monster flicks at the box office to date, so another sequel was inevitable. They even tried to bring Karloff back, but he was unavailable and probably wouldn't have done it anyway. Universal needed to recast the role of the Frankenstein monster, a task they wouldn't take lightly. I'm kidding. They just cast Lon Chaney Jr. Ghost of Frankenstein was the first time Universal had Lon Chaney Jr. play one of their classic monsters after a success with the Wolfman. It was Universal's way of trying to turn Lon Chaney Jr. into his father, their go-to monster guy, a marketing gimmick.
That your mother was the lightning!
Now, getting into the review, I'm not gonna sugarcoat things. Ghost of Frankenstein fucking sucks. This is going to be a pretty short review because honestly, there isn't much to discuss with this movie.
There's a curse upon this village.
Ghost of Frankenstein begins with, surprise, the townspeople of Frankenstein Village pissed off.
The little ones cry in their sleep. They're hungry. There is no bread.
They're always bitching about something. The townspeople blame their bad mood on the thing they blame everything on, the monster.
The curse. Curse of Frankenstein.
You know as well as I do that the monster died in the sulfur pit under Frankenstein's tower.
But the monster's dead, so the villagers, led by Dwight Frye from the original film and Bride of Frankenstein, playing a totally different character again, decide that blowing up Frankenstein's castle will make everything better.
But do as you will with the castle. We'll blow it up!
I mean, at least they'll get to explode something, I guess. Oh yeah, Ygor, played again by Bela Lugosi, is alive after getting shot in the last movie. Jesus, he's harder to kill than the monster. At least that guy needs help coming back to life, which the villagers unwittingly give when they blow up the castle and unleash the monster from his sulfur tomb. And I thought Lon Chaney Jr. couldn't get any wider. Ygor decides to take his monster friend to another, totally different Dr. Frankenstein that happens to reside in this vague Central European country.
He has all the secrets of his father who created you.
Road trip! When the duo arrives in the village of Azaria, the monster gets sidetracked, meeting a little girl. But before he can find the nearest pond to chuck her in, the villagers swarm around the monster in a panic.
Don't do that. You want to kill my child?
Hey, he was aiming for the little girl. Okay, this is why you don't interrupt a guy when he's trying to perform a good deed. Let the guy just get the kid's creepy clown ball.
Take me down. My daddy says no one will hurt you.
The townspeople in this village are at least a little more reasonable. They actually try to put the monster on trial.
What is your name? Where are you from?
Which goes about as well as you'd expect it to. But hey, it went better than the OJ trial. The monster eventually ends up secreted away into the care of Dr. Ludwig Frankenstein, one of, I assume, many illegitimate Frankenstein sons. The original Dr. Frankenstein didn't just create life with corpses and laboratory equipment, he also made time to create life the good old-fashioned way, with his cock.
For years I felt secure, certain that the monster had been destroyed. I tried to keep all knowledge of it from you.
The monster ends up killing a guy during his stay at the Frankenstein residence because, hey, that's what he do. So Ludwig initially decides to disassemble the monster piece by piece.
This monster must be destroyed, piece by piece, just as my father created it.
Until Ludwig is visited by the ghost of his dad, Dr. Henry Frankenstein, like this is a Christmas carol.
Would you destroy that which I, your father, dedicated his life to creating?
Yes, the title Ghost of Frankenstein is fucking literal. I guess the original Dr. Frankenstein received some training from Qui-Gon Jinn, and he uses it to tell his son to give the monster a new, better brain.
What if it had another brain?
And it's intended to be the brain of that guy the monster killed. I mean, free brain, why pass it up? But Ygor intends to have Dr. Frankenstein's partner, Dr. Boner...
Dr. Bowman, I need your aid.
Dr. Bomer, put Igor's brain in the monster's body so Ygor can rule the world!
My brain in that body would make me a leader of men.
Good luck with that. The monster, though, has his own plans. He wants the brain put into his body to be a little girl's for some reason. No! If the monster is given that little girl's brain, he'll be unstoppable!
He wants the brain of that child.
Take me home. Please take me home.
And that's essentially the whole plot of Ghost of Frankenstein. The new Dr. Frankenstein needs to put a different brain into the monster's body, and that takes an hour to happen in a movie that's less than 70 minutes. Ghost of Frankenstein stretches an already thin premise even more thin. Nothing really happens for most of the film. Stuff technically happens, but none of it is really important beyond trying to make the movie long enough to be considered a movie.
I regret, Doctor, I cannot be part of your plan.
There's a scene in the middle of the film that's just a clip show of the original Frankenstein, even though we already know what the monster is. I guess it's just very important for Evelyn Ankers to know what it is, too. Evelyn Ankers plays Elsa Frankenstein, daughter of Ludwig.
Father, promise me.
I promise you, Elsa.
And Elsa is also the name of Wolf von Frankenstein's wife and son of Frankenstein. I guess Frankensteins just really like the name Elsa.
Boris.
Elsa.
Darling.
Elsa.
There is a relationship between Elsa and the village's lone law enforcement Eric, but it's pointless. It's just there to have some romantic angle. Eric and Elsa have no effect on the outcome of the film's story. You could easily cut them out and not lose anything.
Town prosecutor should be in his office working.
Sometimes my work takes me out of my office.
Lon Chaney Jr. does the best he can do in the role of the monster, but the heavier than usual lids Jack Pierce put on this monster's makeup makes it look like Lon Chaney Jr. is constantly squinting or taking a nap.
Can you get my ball?
They tried to take the monster back to his roots by making him really fixated on hanging out with a little girl for some reason, like he's Jeffrey Epstein, but at the end of the day, he's still just a mindless killer again, not the tragic figure of the first film. Bela Lugosi is still good as Ygor, but he doesn't have as much to work with here, and he feels a lot more toned down.
This operation may not be successful. Better death than a life like this.
Ultimately, in the last 5 minutes of the film, Dr. Frankenstein is successful in transplanting the monster's new brain, which, to the doc's surprise, was actually Ygor's brain. Whoa!
I am not Dr. Catling. I am Ygor.
With Lugosi's goofy accent coming out of Lon Chaney Jr.'s mouth. They're gonna regret this in the next movie.
I, Ygor, will live forever.
Meanwhile, the local angry mob is bored.
Let's go to Frankenstein and choke the truth out of him.
So they decide to do what they always do on a dull Saturday night and go fuck up Dr. Frankenstein's lab with some torches. But unfortunately for the villagers, this used to be Dr. Mengele's lab, and the Ygor monster has them gassed. Unfortunately for the Ygor monster, though, he becomes blind because his brain doesn't match the blood type of his body. Which is a thing that can happen, I guess. Be careful, people.
His blood is the same type as Kettering's, not the same as Igor's. It will not feed the sensory nerves.
So in a rage, the Ygor monster destroys all the lab equipment that specifically prevents explosions, leading to the Ygor monster's death as Elsa and Eric walk into the sunset. Wait, were they supposed to be the main characters? The Ghost of Frankenstein is a really dull, cliched, and cheesy sequel, and the last standalone movie in Universal's original Frankenstein series. Universal got desperate after this and just started having the monster cross over with other horror stars to try to maintain the Frankenstein monster's relevance for as long as possible. But with Ghost of Frankenstein, it became clear that any narrative possibilities for Frankenstein had been exhausted in the original trilogy. The series was dead, and we were left with its ghost going forward. I give Ghost of Frankenstein a blind monster Ygor out of regular Ygor. You can't improve perfection.
What good is a brain without eyes to see?
Click the subscribe and bell button for my final June-Iversal Horror video for the year. This video is made possible through the pledges of my Patreon supporters, and I'd like to give a very special thanks to the kind folks pledged to my shoutouts tier. All of the support on Patreon means a lot to me, and it helps my dark influence continue to grow. If you like this video, like it, and if you loved it, click the subscribe and bell buttons for more vids. Be sure to also keep in touch by following me on social media at Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Dr. Wolfula. While I still have your attention, consider pledging to my Patreon to support the channel and get bonus content like previews, VIP Discord server access, private movie night streams, and credits in videos. Consider pledging at patreon.com/Dr. Wolfula. Also, check out official Dr. Wolfula t-shirts and other merch on tpublic.com/user/Dr. Wolfula. Thanks for watching. See you all next time. Dr. Wolfula signing out.